Hi folks, and welcome to the last recorded lecture for History 112. In many ways you have done it, so good job grinding through a very unique semester. Today we're going to keep things very simple, so only one lecture today, and actually instead of listening to me lecture, I am going to allow John Green, who does a series called Crash Course in World History, to engage you in a way that I think is probably much better than I would be able to do. You, at this point, have gone through the last two readings, the last two chapters in the textbook, and I know they were full of lots of discussion of commodities and acronyms like WTO and NAFTA and TPP and EU that are really hard to wrap your head around. Lots of dense economic ideas, discussion of climate change that is probably more scientific than you are used to in a history class. All sorts of different things that in many ways are probably pretty overwhelming. So what I want to do is allow you to view these two videos. They are geared towards high school students, but I think they're appropriate in this context. So that's why they're maybe a bit more animated than you might expect and awfully corny, but in a good way at some point. And as you do that, I want you to think about the questions that I've got up here, right? So we're throwing around this term globalization, and in many ways the world has been global since 1492, or at least the decades afterwards. You've got a global economy that starts in the 16th century, the 1500s, where there's connection between Europe and the Americas and the Philippines and China and back to Europe. So what is globalization really, and what is contemporary 21st century globalism? How is it different from what we would have seen in centuries past? Big question for today is globalism good or is it bad? And there isn't a simple answer, right? It can't just be one or the other. Instead, I want you to interrogate, think about the ways that it is good and it is bad, and who is it good, who is it bad for? Globalization is without a doubt one of the most important factors impacting the lives of everyone in the world today. So what elements of this trend of globalization have reshaped or remade life for the vast majority of people in the world? I also want you to think a little bit about these sources, right? So the video was produced 5 years ago. That means that all sorts of different things have happened since 2016. I think it was actually produced in 2015. Knowing that, how do the things that John Green talks about apply today? He makes this allusion towards the end of his second video about global pandemics. So how does the coronavirus come into play? How do the election how does the election of the past year come into play? How do things like Brexit come into play here? The textbook goes up to 2020. So you might think about the ways that the textbook talks about things that have happened in the past 5 years and compare them to what John Green says, but also kind of the foreshadowing that he throws out there. Lastly, and this is a big question that we're going to play around with in person in class, is how can the study of history, how can what we've done in this class and the skills that you've developed in terms of writing, but also in terms of analyzing sources, help you think about all the things that have happened in your life and why they're important not just to you, but to everyone who lives in this world today. And you might even think a bit forward and think about what the world's going to be like in years coming up, and what is going to shape the way that people live, the standard of living that they have, how people are interconnected, how they relate to climate and climate change, how many of the world's population are in poverty, what industrialization looks like, how trade is important to folks. So with all those things in, I'm going to kick it over to John Green. Two videos that are about 13 minutes each, so all in this week you're doing about 30 minutes worth of work rather than an hour and a half. I'm hopeful that that gives you more time to work on your rough drafts for the paper and dedicate some time to other classes that are probably asking you to submit some major assignments right now. As always, I'm around every day of the week, so if you want to set up an appointment to come meet with me and talk about rough drafts of papers or brainstorm ideas, please do that. You can use the link that is on the syllabus or in my email signature, and if 1 to 2 o'clock does not work for you on any given day, just shoot me an email and say, hey, what about this time? That said, I will let you start watching these videos, and I will see you in person on Wednesday.